go from there. So, how did you become a strategist or get into doing strategy as part of your work?
I guess strategies really just come along as part of problem solving. It's a way to look at a problem from kind of taking a step back and thinking about how you're going to approach it and solve. The strategy is just kind of a natural part of it. So how are you going to get to your answer or your final product? Without having a strategy in place, you're not really going to be set up to succeed and get to that final product. You can't just jump in and start building something. Mm-hmm. You have to have a game plan.
Unfortunately, and maybe it's just my Australian accent, I have two options for you and both free. So you might have heard that Google, Apple and Microsoft are currently spending a ton of money on building and refining their virtual assistant apps. So Google Now, Siri, and these apps rely heavily on voice recognition in order to deliver us the results.
Progression of things.
So at what point did you start getting into strategy?
I mean, I'd say that it's kind of always been there.
In your line of work?
Yeah.
What's your background?
So I've worked at a number of agencies, and from those agencies, I've been kind of immersed in all kinds of different digital platforms, different types of technology, specifically solving problems with technology. So going back to building things with touchscreens before they were on all of our phones and in our pockets, and sourcing things, finding either equipment or technologies that are going to support those types of platforms, how best we can interact with them and optimize for those specific hardware or a specific use case. And that's really just kind of carried over into everything from websites and then into mobile applications. Mm-hmm. It's finding the limits of the technology that you're working with, and then seeing how it best applies to the problem that you're working on.
Okay. Did you learn any of this, these strategies or these workflows in school? No. So,
not at all.
And what's your background?
For school?
Yeah, for school, like for
San Diego State graphic design art program. I learned the basics there. Got kind of just kind of a general overview type of education. Somewhat of an introduction to design principles in a more formal sense, but
it didn't have any user experience principles at all.
No,
because at the time,
it wasn't really even a thing back then.
And when was this?
2004, 2005.
So there wasn't any schooling, any programs that had.
No, and the majority of the stuff I was doing back then was mostly focused on print work. Mm-hmm. There was a little bit of web and they were calling it interactive media. And the majority of stuff that I learned that I thought was relevant were things I learned through internships or actually hands-on work experience. I started a part-time internship turned into full-time in my junior year, and I learned 10 times more at that than I did in school.
And where was this at?
It was a firm called LJG. I actually spent 6 years with them, from then all the way up until I left, and I learned a ton there. I learned way more there than I ever did in school. It was a chance to apply things that I have learned, but for me personally, I learned way more by doing than actually, studying the theory of it.
So did you have what were did you have mentors at this agency?
Yeah, I had a number of people who, showed me the ropes, but also let me kind of go and do things on my own, fail on my own, make my own mistakes. They put a lot of trust and faith in me right away. And so I got thrown into projects, and it was like, here you go, here's your project. Like, go meet with this client and figure out what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I had no background in doing that. I just like, sat in on a couple meetings, and I was just like, okay, figuring this out. So,
Was it primarily like websites or
web, and like large scale touchscreens, and so like interactive kiosks and stuff.
Yeah.
So there'd be things that were maybe like a wayfinding system in a lobby, something that was on like a 70-inch touchscreen that we would spec out hardware for. We'd figure out the software integrations, do everything from the motion graphics all the way through to the various workflows that a user would go through. So
yeah.
We started mapping all that stuff out, and then we had a development team there who would implement. We were doing a lot of things, and we were using Flash, we were using Director, Macromedia Director, a lot of stuff in that. And then what else? I think we kind of started carrying things over into more of a responsive web kind of towards the end of it.
Yeah. And when did you start this internship?
2004.
2004?
Yeah.
The spring of 2000?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And what are some nuggets you've taken from those internships that kind of like remain true up until now? And that you learned specifically about UX and strategy?
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, it was a culmination of things. I'd say the majority of stuff, a lot of what I learned there was just like kind of like managing accounts, managing clients, and then kind of how that relates to your overall project.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much as you want to say the strategy is just on the product side of things, a lot of it has to do with like who you're working for and how.
Like managing like expectations and
managing expectations, figuring out expectations too.
Mm-hmm.
So learning requirements, learning what you need to do when you're just kind of thrown into a project, and how to make it successful. So,
and that's something you didn't learn in school at all?
No, I mean that's something that I think just comes with. That's something you can't really. I don't think you can learn well from a book. That's just, or any type of course. That's like just hands-on doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, strategy. I think the kind of strategy that you're leaning towards is like how do you like approach things out with what's a repeatable process, stuff like that. A lot of that stuff didn't really come until later. I mean, my initial internships I'd say were just more or less foundation type of work. It's like.
Did they talk about user experience in the way that we talk about it today?
Not at all. No, I mean that wasn't really even a term that was even used.
Yeah.
It was kind of a new thing that people were talking about, but like you had the title back then would be more like a digital designer or something, or interactive media. That was a term that was used heavily.
Yeah.
Interactive this and that, and so that it was kind of a different world in that. I mean, there weren't the types of integrations that we have available today. Things were a little more Wild West. Things like APIs and stuff are just kind of getting defined.
Yeah. Awesome. So what does UX strategy mean to you?
For me, and I think for what we do, that's more of more of a product strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only how a user is going to interact with a product, but it's like where does that product fit into that user's life cycle, what they're doing day to day. Why is it relevant to them?
Where's the value proposition?
Exactly. So how does this fit into their life? You know, how does this fit into to make things as something that's going to be useful to them, and for what reasons? And so looking at it from the standpoint of, you know, if we're using some type of integration, you know, is that something that this user is already consuming? Is this going to be like relevant? Is it just going to be repackaging something that they already have? So like, you know, say we're using some type of Foursquare integration, are we using this in a different way that that they haven't thought of before, or that they're not currently using it, or are we just repackaging something that they already have? You know, how does it fit into their life, and how is it going to provide value? That's kind of the holistic approach to the strategy. How are we going to improve their day to day? So more than just, you know, what's the on-screen flow? How does it fit in outside of that?
Yeah. And how did you learn business strategy?
Again, it's just kind of more by doing, seeing how things fit in to a business's overall approach. So how does this product or products, how do they fit into what this business is already offering? So is this something that they're going to be completely relying on? This is their one and only product, or is it a complement to what they're already using?
Yeah.
A lot of that's going to gauge how much value that they are going to be, one, willing to put into it, and two, they're going to get out of it. So if it's just something that is kind of like a nice to have and add on, they're not fully relying on it as a business. But if it's their one and only product that they're either marketing, selling brand, you know, that is their product, then of course that's going to be, you know, their most important thing. That's their asset. So in terms of, you know, how that strategy fits into their, you know, what they're doing as a business, it's going to relate back to how much they really care about that product, you know, and then how to maximize that or make it more efficient is going to depend on how good relates back to the overall product strategy. So how is it going to fit into whoever's using it? How's it going to fit into their life cycle of their day-to-day? So it could be something that's like an ancillary product to their business, but their, you know, customer support team or their sales team is using that every day, and that's really impacting their workflow. So they can spend less time interacting with this application and more time, you know, servicing customers.
Yeah.
So it's going to impact their overall bottom line. It's all just kind of ties together.
Yeah. And do you think it's helpful for UX designers who are inspiring strategists to get an MBA or a business degree?
Hard for me to answer because I have not either of those.
Yeah.
I can't say it's not beneficial, but again, my take on those types of things is that I think learning by doing and actually working and building things is a lot more beneficial than learning the theory of it. There's, you know, a ton you can learn from having an MBA or a business degree, but I think if you're really pursuing a UX path, there's a lot more to be learned and leveraged by building and doing in the real world than it is learning about the theory of it. If you're going to go probably the MBA or business degree route, you're probably just shooting for, you know, either management and leadership, something like that, you know. So
if say you had what's that word? A job candidate applying, and he or she has a MBA or a business degree, would you take precedence over that person above someone who may not have?
No, not. I mean, not for a UX designer or UX lead. I think that's great to have, but you know, in that case, you might be looking at more someone who's more of like a researcher,
Yeah.
than say a designer. You know, you can have a ton of degrees, but you can just not have a good eye for aesthetics.
Yeah.
And so, or have a good understanding of empathy for your users.
Mm-hmm.
So without those things, without demonstrated practice of it, you know, the degrees and you know, a lot of what we're seeing lately are like you know, the HCI, human computer interactions, stuff like that. You know, they're more of like a research type of role.
Yeah.
You know, I know UCSD has an emphasis in that program, or has a program in that. And the types of folks that are coming out of that program are more centered around user research and you know, data research, data science, which is super valuable. Don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily what I would look for in a UX designer.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the two can complement each other, but they're very much separate. As being kind of a small shop, we look for like the person who kind of has an understanding of all of it.
We can do a lot
in design and, you know, do research and strategy. Larger places tend to have more specialized roles.
Awesome. What kind of products have you done strategy for that were the most exciting or fun to work on? And if you don't feel, I mean, you know.
Sure. I mean, everything has its own unique challenges and kind of their own interesting rewards. Some of the things that are most fun, though, to me, are the things that are a merge of a lot of different technologies. So it's not just necessarily working in say one stack or you know, one particular platform. Say it's just a responsive web project. I love working on mobile things where we can combine a number of different platforms. And
when you mean platforms, you mean?
Sorry, like getting distracted here. Like different APIs, getting those things to kind of work together, in a different way, you know. So kind of going back to like what we were talking about earlier, I guess it's just on my mind, but getting a way for, like, we're looking at Foursquare right now and trying to get that to interact with a couple of other different APIs and providing something new on top of that. So combining a couple things together to create something really new. That's super fun because there's a lot of research that goes into that in terms of like finding out what we can and can't do with it, and like, you know, building a little proof of concept. It's not just design kind of working in a silo. There's a lot that we have to do in order to vet out that proof of concept. So those are pretty rewarding. The other things are the types of project where you really impact somebody's day to day, and so it could be redesigning a portal or redesigning something that they work in every day and they have a lot of frustration with, and you can go to them, hear them out, and understand what they don't like about it, what they want to improve, and then improve that, release it back to them, and then hear how much that's improving their day to day and how they work.
Nice. So when you talk about those portals, would you be with the one like the healthcare portals that we worked on? Would those be like a good
healthcare portal? We're working on one right now for like I guess that's not really insurance. So it's invoice factoring. That one for eCapital. So same sort of thing there. Some really great research coming out of that and user interviews, and then you know, it's a work in progress, but seeing how it impacts their day.